You say that what we really should be striving for is to create in our children kind of a skeptical outlook based on reason. What do you mean by that? What are you looking for?
Well, I mean, one of the great legacies of the 18th century, of course, is a certain passion for and faith in reason. Mm-hmm. And as the Romantics, including Rousseau, pointed out, you can't live by reason alone, granted.
Right.
But I think this is one legacy of the 18th century that we ought to take very seriously in educating our young. That our young people have to learn now to live with uncertainty. It's very hard to do. But that is what a skeptical attitude leads people. Mm-hmm. That you believe in things, but you never want to reach a point where you're absolutely certain that this is so. Because when you reach that point, if anyone disagrees with you, that person can become a mortal threat.
Well, in fact, you advocate also more religious teaching to our children. I mean, how does that fit in the child?
Because I think science needs religion, and religion needs science. Mm-hmm. And I think the battle that these two ways of knowing have been having for 150 or 200 years is now not productive anymore. What we need to do is recognize the realm of knowing that science allows us to enter, mm-hmm. and the realm of knowing that religion allows us to enter. And I think we need both. Now, I think in the 21st century, we will have to find new narratives, as I call them, that help us to create a sense of meaning and spirituality. It may not be what traditional believers at an earlier time mm-hmm. believed.
Well, in fact, that's where I wanted to go next, because, I mean, the biggest difference, it strikes me, between the 18th century and the 20th is that we no longer ask the big questions. People are afraid to sit around and saying, why is there something and not nothing? What is the meaning of life? These are seen as either frivolous or a waste of time. I mean, what happened along there? This actually consumed Locke and Rousseau. It doesn't seem to consume anyone. There is no philosophical construct in our discussion.
Yes. I think you're right, and this is a catastrophe for us, and that's why I think I mean, Nietzsche said God is dead. Mm-hmm. That's one way of putting it, but I think the 20th century was characterized by the absence of our capacity to address such questions. And that, I think, is connected with this religious orientation, which I think is essential to people. Because what is it, Allan, other than our attempt to find meaning? I quote Bertrand Russell.
That should drive book. Science.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. I mean, Russell gives the sort of non-religious view of life. And I have this long quote by him. It's one of the most depressing things you can imagine. Mm-hmm. You're here, you're a speck, an accident, right. as it were, and you're not going to be here, and then that's it. And it was a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. I don't think most people can live that way. I think we need some sense of meaning. Why are we doing this? Why are we even being a moral person? I mean, what is the authority for this? Well, we haven't been busy asking ourselves questions like that. In part, the 18th century invented the idea of progress, and that meant we were going to continuously improve the human condition. And all we had to do was invent things. Mm-hmm. And we discovered how to invent things. So we don't have to waste our time asking these questions. they're silly. They're not productive. It turns out that those are exactly the questions we need to ask.
The debate, dialogue, and discourse that occurred in the 18th century. I mean, we've talked about not seeing much of it anymore. And then, in fact, you say that this also has posed a real threat to our sense of community. I mean, when you think of community today, or many people talk about community, they talk about virtual communities.
Yes.
And again, how this is so empowering that I can go to a chat room on Ford Mustangs.
Well, sure. Today, there's a completely different meaning of the word community.
Yes.
I think people mean by community when they go online is that they want to find someone who shares their interests or perhaps who agrees with them about some matter. The older meaning of community was not that you and I had the same interests, but we lived in the same place and we had to negotiate our differences
and have
in order
consensus.
to live decently. So that a community meant a working out, a negotiation of differences in the interests of social solidarity. Community now on the net and computer technology generally is something completely different.
In fact, you almost see this as
almost the opposite.
The opposite of
Yes.
democracy, because
Yes.
it doesn't really invite
Yes.
discourse or different point of views.
That's right.
Now, I wanted to ask just about you, because I mean, you're one of the best known and respected thinkers in modern times. And your job is to understand society, to dissect it, to analyze it. Yet, you have actively eschewed email and computers and everything else. How do you stay in touch? How do you stay in tune with the society that you comment on and analyze?
Well, in a lot of ways to answer that. One is to just remind you that you could comment and say very perceptive things about the impact of, say, the automobile on a culture without yourself owning a car. Or even knowing how to drive, although that might help a little. In my case, I ask questions of myself that I mentioned before. I ask myself, what is the problem this technology will solve for me? Now, I write, maybe I mentioned this last time we talked, but I write all my books with
Your felt pen.
with this object here,
Yes.
see, on a yellow paper. And this disappoints many of my students, and they say, well, I should get at the very least a word processor.
Pretty
And I
benign.
say, why? They say, well, for the spell check. I tell them I actually know how to spell. Then they say, well, you can move a paragraph from page 25 to page 8 in a jiffy.
Sure.
But I tell them I never do that. It's probably a sign of a disordered mind. But for a computer and email, I mean, I have enough media in my life. I'm buried by media. People say, well, you could have access to information. I have no problem getting access to information. But if I found that I could not do something that I thought it was important to do, unless I had email very handy, then I would probably do it.
Now, given that it's unlikely that we're going to turn our back on television or the internet or the digital economy in the short term, I mean, how hopeful are you that in the millennium that we confront now, people are going to learn the lessons that were available in the 18th century?
Well, it's hard to be very optimistic because so much of the economy, not only in the States but in Canada but worldwide, is being driven at the moment by technological growth, so that the corporate world is spending a fortune persuading us that we need all of this in order to get into the 21st century. So I think that will continue. But if there are any people, any place, who would begin to ask some serious questions about where it's all taking them, it would be Canadians, wouldn't it?
How so?
Well, I mean, this attitude that I have, which you were kind enough to label as important, I got from Canadians. From
McLuhan.
Well, Harold Innes and Marshall McLuhan and Edmund Carpenter. I mean, was the... And McLuhan used to say, Allan, that he got this perspective precisely because he was able to look at America from a little distance. So he could see, and of course Innes hated America because he saw Canada being colonized by America. But there's a wonderful academic tradition here in Canada of raising the most serious questions about media and its effect on our social, psychic, and political life. So it's always good news to me to come to Canada to talk about these things because I feel refreshed. And in America, it's a little harder to talk about this because people are having such a love affair with technology that if you simply just want to raise these questions without saying that you know the answers, people think you're a subversive or something like that.